Welcome, cherished listener, to another soothing exploration through the pages of history. As you prepare for a peaceful night's sleep or a moment of serene reflection, I invite you to let your imagination drift alongside me to a far-off time and place. Before we embark on our journey into the harsh realities faced by everyday Europeans during the Middle Ages, I would love to hear from you about where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Please feel free to leave a comment to say hello. If you find comfort in these softly narrated tales from history, I encourage you to subscribe for more calming stories of the past. This evening, we'll travel back to the era of royalty and serfs, knights and farmers, grand fortresses and modest hamlets. It's a time that captivates the imagination, yet one rife with significant challenges and struggles for the common folk. We're discussing medieval Europe, a time frame that extends approximately from the 5th to the 15th centuries. But before we delve into the stark conditions of that age, let's gently transition with a deep breath as we visualize a typical village in the European countryside, likely around the 12th century. Imagine a small cluster of basic homes, resembling huts made from mud and straw, topped with reed thatching. Smoke wafts from chimneys as the villagers awaken to greet a new day. Chickens forage the ground, while pigs rummage through the muddy paths. Their grunts intertwine with the bleating of sheep grazing in the meadows beyond. The air is saturated with the robust aroma of livestock, wood smoke, and a hint of the tanner's craft. In the distance, the Lord's Manor and the spire of the village church stand tall above the surrounding trees. It's a pastoral scene, perhaps even delightful to our modern eyes. Yet, this charm masks the harsh truths experienced by those who inhabited this land. For the typical peasant, existence was a relentless battle against famine, illness, exhausting labor, and the crushing burden of the feudal system that bound them to the land and their noble overlords. As dawn breaks and the rooster crows, we focus on one specific family, a weary, weather-beaten man, his wife nursing a baby, and their cluster of children as they arise from their straw beds to confront another day of hard work. Unbeknownst to them, today's challenges and sorrow will surpass the usual tribulations they face. The father, whom we'll refer to as John, stretches his sore muscles as he steps into the brisk morning air. He already anticipates the long hours ahead, laboring on the land rented from the local lord. He understands that his wife Anne will be busy with the little ones, grinding grain for bread, caring for the garden, and feeding the livestock. The children, too, will be set to work as soon as they're capable of walking and hauling a bucket. There is no time for play, as every pair of hands is essential to ensure the family's survival. Even their eldest daughter, just 12 years old, realizes she may soon be married off to lessen her parents' burden and forge a beneficial alliance with another family. As John and his older sons make their way to the fields, let's take a moment to reflect on the reality of their lives, laboring beneath the sweltering sun and the watchful gaze of the Lord's reeve. Subsistence farming was far from simple in an era devoid of modern machinery and agricultural advancements. The tools available to them were rudimentary: clunky wooden plows, sickles for harvesting wheat, and flails for threshing grain. The labor was grueling, the days endless, and the rewards scant. A good harvest would provide just enough to feed the family and fulfill the Lord's share, with little remaining to sell or barter. A poor harvest could lead to catastrophe, making it impossible to pay rent and taxes, ultimately resulting in hunger or even being forced off their land, their sole means of survival. The constant threat of illness and injury was always present. A fractured bone, a festering wound, a sudden fever, or intestinal troubles. Each of these could prove fatal in an age devoid of antibiotics and advanced medical care. John had experienced the loss of 2 brothers in infancy, and more poignantly his father, who succumbed to a relentless cough that left him frail and gasping for breath. As the sun ascends higher in the sky, John and his children persist in their labor, taking a brief respite only for a meager midday repast of coarse bread and cheese. Their hands are blistered and their backs ache, yet they dare not rest too long, fearing that their delay might put them behind in their tasks and draw the ire of the Lord or his reeve. The reeve was a peasant like them, though slightly elevated, due to his role of managing the manor's lands and assigning tasks to the serfs. Some reeves exhibited fairness, attempting to mediate the needs of the peasants while fulfilling the lord's expectations. However, many, intoxicated by the modicum of power they possessed, became petty tyrants, meting out punishments and cruelty at the slightest indication of disobedience or disrespect. As the lengthy day drags on, let's focus on a particular. Reeve named Thomas, a stern-faced man who believed himself superior to the common folk, wearing a slightly finer tunic and exuding an air of self-importance. He reveled in exerting his authority over the peasants he governed, inflicting beatings for the most minor perceived slights. On this particular day, his attention was drawn to John, who was struggling to keep pace in the fields. The harvest this year was poorer than anticipated, and John's youngest had been ill with a fever, demanding more of Anne's care. Consequently, John found himself behind in his quota of bushels, and Thomas was adamant about making an example of him. "Go there, John," Thomas shouted, approaching where John was labouring. "Why are you dawdling? Do you believe the Lord's granaries will fill themselves?" John kept his gaze low, aware that any sign of defiance would only escalate the situation. "My apologies, sir," he murmured. "My child has been unwell." "And my wife—" Thomas interrupted him with a derisive laugh. "Your wife, your child, your aching back. You serfs are brimming with excuses, but the Lord is indifferent to your woes. He expects his rightful share, and it is my duty to ensure he receives it." With that, Thomas signaled to one of his subordinates, a sturdy individual with a cudgel hanging from his belt. 10 lashes, I believe, to encourage a better work ethic, along with a double portion owed from his harvest to compensate for his laziness. John felt a sinking feeling as rough hands grasped him and pulled him toward the whipping post at the field's edge. He understood that this punishment would incapacitate him for days, and that the double portion would spell famine for his family, come winter. Yet he also recognized that any act of defiance would only bring harsher consequences for himself and those he cherished. The witch trials during the medieval period represent a particularly dark and sorrowful era in human history. Across Europe, countless individuals, predominantly women, faced accusations of witchcraft resulting in horrific interrogations, torture, and executions. The tragic narrative of the solitary old woman alienated by her community was all too frequent. Residing on the outskirts for as long as anyone could recall, she had no family to support her and depended on the goodwill of neighbors, bartering herbal remedies and midwifery expertise for scant food. But as she aged and became increasingly isolated, rumors began to circulate. When harvests faltered or livestock fell sick, wary gazes turned toward the old woman and her eerie potions. Children were cautioned to steer clear of her run-down hovel, lest she ensnare them with a curse. As fear and gossip began to grip the community, accusations of witchcraft spread rapidly. One fateful day, a furious mob of villagers led by the self-righteous parish priest stormed her home. They hauled the frightened old woman to a hastily convened court, where she was charged with consorting with the devil and casting malevolent spells. No amount of desperate pleas or declarations of innocence could sway the bloodthirsty mob. The trial, if it could even be called that, was a mockery. Questionable evidence and rumors were paraded as irrefutable proof of her guilt. When she stood firm and refused to confess, even under pressure, the crowd found all the justification they required. The judgment was handed down: death by drowning. On a dreary, overcast morning, the old woman was bound and transported to the riverbank. A priest provided one last opportunity for forgiveness if she would just admit to her supposed sins, but she remained defiantly mute. With a signal from the baith, she was thrust into the icy, swirling current. As her life ebbed away, the villagers observed with a troubling blend of satisfaction and horror. Some claimed to see dark spirits escaping from her lifeless form, affirming their righteous conviction. Others turned away, eager to leave the grim affair behind and return to their mundane lives. Ultimately, the woman's demise was dictated not by any true malfeasance on her part, but by the fear, ignorance, and brutality of a society all too willing to target its most defenseless members. This heartbreaking saga unfolded many times across medieval Europe, as innocent lives were extinguished in the name of religious zeal and mob justice. The widespread lack of education and scientific knowledge during the Middle Ages allowed such superstitions and fears to take firm root. For the ordinary peasant laborer, there were scant opportunities for education beyond basic skills handed down from previous generations. Literacy and numeracy were privileges that belonged primarily to the wealthy elite and the clergy. In a realm illuminated solely by flames, where the whims of nature determined harvests and health, it was all too convenient to blame calamities on malevolent spirits or unscrupulous neighbors. Lacking the means to comprehend their challenging and meager lives, people turned to age-old tales and the limited teachings of the church. Priests and monks frequently prioritized maintaining their own authority and power over enlightening the populace. They tightly held onto their exclusive access to knowledge, dispensing bits of wisdom and steering village affairs to align with their own agenda. For an ordinary farmer or artisan, defying this established hierarchy was unimaginable. The best one could aspire to was to memorize their prayers, fulfill their tithes, and remain in the favor of local powers. Deviating from expected behavior or attracting unwanted attention was a sure route to disaster. Thus, for generations, the populace of medieval Europe remained trapped in a relentless cycle of destitution, superstition, and suppression. The dawn of learning would later begin to break through this darkness with the emergence of universities and the proliferation of the printing press in the later Middle Ages. Yet, for the weary souls laboring in fields and filth-laden streets, that hopeful future must have appeared agonizingly far away. Their lives consisted of an unending cycle of grueling work, punctuated only by the rare occasions of weddings, religious observances, or public executions. In a realm filled with scant comfort or entertainment, simple joys, a nourishing meal, a cozy fire, a friendly word, assumed great significance. Even amidst the bleakest circumstances, the human spirit persevered. Parents continued to love their children with fervor, neighbors united to face adversities, and even the most downtrodden serf dared to envision a better existence, whether in this life or the next. These were the individuals who paved the way for modern Europe, piece by piece and seed by seed. Though they might be remembered only as names long since faded into history, their trials and sacrifices resonate across the ages. We who reap the benefits of their hard work owe them an immense debt of gratitude. Let us now return to that modest peasant family we encountered at the outset of our story. As they settled down to sleep after yet another arduous day, their stomachs rumbling and their bodies aching from weariness, they might find comfort in the ties of family and community that uphold them. The father draws his cloak tightly around him to ward off the chilly night air, and murmurs a prayer for an abundant harvest. The mother gathers her little ones closely, thankful to have endured another season, while the children surrender to slumber, their thoughts filled with carefree visions of adventure and possibility, rather than the day's burdens. In the flickering glow of the dying hearth fire, we glimpse the faint promise of a future yet to unfold, a future filled with greater knowledge, prosperity, and freedom that their descendants will one day possess. A reality built upon the foundation of their hard work, their tears, and their quiet, uncelebrated acts of love and resilience. Thus, we say goodnight to our medieval ancestors, assured that their legacy lives on through us. Rest well, weary travelers from times long past. Your narrative is intertwined with ours, and it will not fade into oblivion. As the sun sinks beneath the horizon, casting elongated shadows over the manor's fields, the fatigued peasant family makes their way back to their simple dwelling. The father, his hands rough and stained from a day spent ploughing, paves the way. Forward! His wife walks closely behind, balancing a basket of scant vegetables against her hip. Their children, 2 boys and a girl, follow in their wake, their bare feet marking the soft earth with imprints. The single-room cottage provides little solace after a day of labor. The thatched roof seeps when rain falls, and the walls allow cold drafts to penetrate during winter. A single straw-filled mattress, shared among the entire family, rests in the corner. The mother kindles a modest flame in the hearth and starts making a tasteless stew of turnips, onions, and a piece of salted pork. It may not be lavish, but it must sustain them until morning. As the children gather around the flickering light, their father entertains them with tales handed down through time. He speaks of gallant knights and lovely maidens, of dragons and wizards. For a brief moment, the family escapes their struggles, whisked away to a realm of enchantment and excitement. Yet reality swiftly returns as a cold breeze seeps through the cracks in the walls. This family's hardships are not isolated. Throughout the land, countless peasant families face similar trials. They form the spine of the feudal structure, laboring tirelessly to uphold the extravagant lives of the nobility. Yet their own lives are not theirs to control. They are tied to the land, subject to the whims of their lord and the unpredictability of nature. Among these peasants was a man named John Atwood, born in the early 14th century in a modest English village. John was the offspring of a farmer. From an early age, he understood the rhythm of agriculture, planting and harvesting according to the seasons. He wed young, as was customary, and began a family of his own. However, John's life took a grim turn when his village was ravaged by the Black Death. The plague arrived via rats and their fleas, spreading rapidly through their close-knit community. John looked on in horror as his neighbors succumbed, racked with fevers and covered in painful black boils. Tragically, his wife and 2 children fell victim to the illness, leaving him with only his infant son. In the wake of the plague, John grappled with keeping his farm viable. With so many deceased, labor was scarce, and the lord of the manor imposed even greater demands on the surviving peasants. In the wake of the plague, John grappled with keeping his farm viable. With so many deceased, labor was scarce, and the lord of the manor imposed even greater demands on the surviving peasants. John toiled from dawn until dusk, his hands worn and his back in agony, yet it was never adequate. When he was unable to settle his rent, the lord's enforcers confiscated his last cow, leaving him unable to provide for his son. Fueled by desperation and anger, John allied himself with a band of peasants planning to rise up against their lord. They convened in secrecy, murmuring about freedom and justice, but their plot was uncovered, leading to John's capture and his subsequent presentation before the lord for punishment. In the grim dungeon of the manor, John endured unspeakable torment. His body was shattered and his spirit crushed. Once finally released, John was drastically transformed. He returned to his farm, yet he could no longer find pleasure in life's simplest joys. His son, now a young lad, attempted to console him, but John was tormented by the memories of his suffering. He became isolated and resentful, lashing out at those nearby. As time went on, John's health declined. His once robust hands now twisted with arthritis. His vision faded, and his hearing dulled. He passed his days by the fire, staring into the flames and mumbling to himself. His son, now an adult with his own family, tried his best to tend to him. However, John was lost in his realm of pain and sorrow. On a frigid winter morning, John's son discovered him slumped in his chair, his eyes shut and his breathing faint. He had slipped away during the night, his suffering at last over. The village priest recited a brief prayer over his body before it was laid to rest in the icy earth. No gravestone marked his resting place, just a simple wooden cross that would soon decay. John Atwood's narrative stands as a testament to the struggles faced by the common folk of medieval Europe. It's a tale of destitution, disease and tyranny, of lives tragically shortened by the harshness of fate and the apathy of the powerful. Yet it is also a story of perseverance, showcasing the human spirit's capacity to endure through the bleakest of times. As we reflect on this historical era from the ease of our contemporary lives, it's simple to idealize the past, to envision an age filled with gallantry and romance, populated by noble knights and damsels in distress. Yet the truth was quite the opposite. For most individuals, existence was a relentless struggle, a ceaseless fight against hunger, illness, and the caprices of those in authority. Even the nobility, adorned in their fine garments and indulging in extravagant feasts, were not shielded from the tribulations of their time. They too experienced sickness and malnutrition, continually confronted with threats of violence and political turmoil. Despite their wealth and influence, they were still constrained by the strict social classes dictated by the feudal system their lives governed by the obligations of their rank and position. In the broader tapestry of history, the medieval age may appear as an alien and distant realm. Nevertheless, the challenges and victories of those who lived during that time bear striking similarities to our own experiences. They too experienced love and laughter, aspirations and dreams. They also searched for meaning and purpose in their lives, even amidst the most profound struggles. As the stars twinkle above and the world drifts into slumber, let's pause to honor the lives of those who walk this earth before us, remembering their challenges and sacrifices and drawing inspiration from their resilience. Ultimately, we are all intertwined through the enduring strands of our shared humanity across both time and space. The peasant family is now asleep, nestled together for warmth on their straw mattress. A new day will dawn, bringing along fresh challenges, sorrow and joy. But for now they find rest. Their dreams serve as an escape from the struggles of their waking hours. As the night deepens and the fire dwindles, the spirits of the past stand vigil over them, sharing stories of hope and resilience in the shadows. As the Lord's procession makes its way back to the manor house, we shift our focus to the serfs' quarters. Smoke escapes from the thatched rooftops, the fragrance of peat fires blending with the earthy scent of newly baked bread. Children weave playfully around the huts, their laughter creating brief moments of joy amid the daily toil. Inside one of these modest homes, we encounter a young boy named Thomas. He sits cross-legged on the earthen floor, intently observing his father, John, as he skillfully carves a wooden spoon with a small knife. John's hands are rough and weathered, a clear indication of his years spent laboring in the fields. He looks up at Thomas with a tired smile. "One day, my boy," he gently says, "you'll have a craft of your own, a means to support yourself that won't require breaking your back in the fields." Thomas's eyes light up with interest. "Like what, father?" John pauses his work, setting down the knife to grab a piece of bread. He tears it in half, giving a portion to his son. "Well," he reflects, "there's the blacksmith, the cooper, the tanner, men who create with their hands. It's hard work, but a different type of hard than what we do out there." He gestures toward the fields beyond their door. Thomas chews thoughtfully, his young mind struggling to envision a life outside. The manor. He has heard tales of rising towns across the land, places where a man could forge his own path. But for the moment, such dreams feel as far away as the stars above. As evening descends, John and Thomas head to the fields for their final tasks of the day, joining the other serfs in the communal land, each family accountable for its own plot. The soil is heavy and sticky, clinging to their boots as they walk through the furrows. John picks up his ox-drawn plough, the animal snorting and stamping under the weight of the yoke. Thomas follows closely behind, scattering seeds from a woven basket at his side. It's exhausting work, the plough snagging on roots and stones as the seeds vanish into the unyielding ground. As they labor, John entertains his son with stories of their forebears, individuals who have toiled on this same ground for countless years. He recounts their victories and setbacks, the biting winters and the fruitful harvests. Thomas listens closely, feeling the weight of his lineage resting heavily upon him. Yet, there remains a tale that John has kept to himself, one that plagues his thoughts both in slumber and in wakefulness. It is the narrative of his own father, a man crushed by the brutality of their lord. Thomas's grandfather was a resilient man, an adept farmer capable of drawing life from even the most obstinate earth. Nevertheless, he was also a proud individual, one who bristled against the inequities of the feudal order. When the lord demanded an additional share of the harvest one year, leaving the serfs with scarcely enough to make ends meet, Thomas's grandfather stood firmly against him. The retribution was swift and savage. The lord's men seized the old man before the entire village, his wrists bound behind him. The lord himself imposed the punishment, 30 lashes for defiance. Thomas's grandfather was stripped to the waist, his weathered skin exposed to the chilly autumn breeze. The whip sliced through the air repeatedly, each strike leaving a vivid crimson mark across the old man's back. He gritted his teeth, stubbornly refraining from crying out, his gaze fixed on some far-off point beyond the manor walls. When the ordeal concluded, they abandoned him there, bound and bleeding, as a grim warning to those who might dare to resist. Young John, merely a boy at that time, watched in helplessness as his father struggled to rise, his once erect back now hunched, with agony and humiliation. That night, as John assisted his mother in tending to his father's wounds, he made a silent promise. He would protect his own family from suffering the same fate. He would endure the injustices, the grueling labor, the ever-present hunger, to ensure their safety. And now, as he observes Thomas scattering seeds with the carefree spirit of youth, John feels that promise bearing down on his heart. He understands that his son is worthy of a better existence, an opportunity to rise above being just another serf, bound to the land. Yet, how can he provide that opportunity when each day is a fight merely to get by? As the sun sinks beneath the horizon, John and Thomas return to the village, their bodies weary from toil. The fire's smoke has dwindled, replaced by the flickering glow of tallow candles in the windows. Inside their humble hut, John's wife, Margaret, has prepared a meager meal of stewed turnips and barley bread. She glances up as they enter, her face etched with concern. "Any news from the manor?" she inquires quietly, her eyes scanning John's face for a glimmer of hope. John shakes his head as he settles down onto the rough wooden bench. "Just the same old demands," he sighs. "More grain for the Lord's table, more hours in the fields." Margaret nods, her shoulders heavy with the burden they share. She serves, the thin stew into wooden bowls, her hands trembling slightly. They eat in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Suddenly, a disturbance outside disrupts the stillness. John jumps to his feet, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his side. But it's not the Lord's men arriving to impose a fresh punishment. It's a group of villagers, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight. They gather at the entrance, raising their voices in a chaotic mix of fear and uncertainty. John pushes his way through the crowd, his heart racing, and there, in the village square, lies a sight that will haunt him forever. It's the corpse of a young man, his skin marred by dark oozing sores. His vacant eyes gaze skyward, his mouth contorted in an expression of anguish. The villagers draw back in horror, their hands instinctively covering their mouths to block the stench of death. A chilling dread settles deep within John. He has heard the rumors, whispers of a dreadful plague sweeping through the land. A sudden plague arrives without warning, decimating entire communities in its path. As John gazes at the lifeless form of a young man, he realizes that their lives are irrevocably altered. The Black Death has arrived in their village, and the world as they know it will never return. In the ensuing days, the disease spreads uncontrollably through the narrow, squalid alleys of the settlement. Families crowd together in their huts, watching in despair as their loved ones fall prey to fever, chills, and the excruciating agony from the swollen, dark lumps forming on their bodies. John and Margaret strive to keep Thomas protected, holding him closely and praying earnestly to a deity that appears to have forsaken them. Yet, despite their dedicated efforts, they cannot halt the relentless advance of the infection. It starts with a cough, a mild fever that they attempt to dismiss, but soon Margaret becomes bedridden, racked with pain as the lumps emerge on her skin. John is by her side day and night, cooling her forehead and offering reassurances that feel empty in his ears. When she finally passes away, her once lively eyes dimmed by the illness, John feels a piece of himself fade alongside her. He lays her to rest in the small churchyard, where the ground is already dotted with the freshly digged graves of their neighbors. Thomas, his cheeks streaked with tears, clings to his father's leg as the priest administers the last rites. John holds him tightly, trying to be a pillar of strength for his son even as his own heart shatters. In the weeks that follow, the village plunges into a state of chaos. The fields remain untended, livestock roam freely as their owners fall victim to the plague. The Lord and his family barricade themselves inside the manor, abandoning the serfs to fend for themselves. John and Thomas scrape together a meager existence, scrounging for whatever food they can find, praying fervently for their survival. Yet a shadow of death looms heavily over the village, serving as a continuous reminder of life's fragility in this brutal, unsparing reality. As days merge into weeks and weeks into months, the grip of the plague begins to loosen on the community. The ailing and departed are replaced by the hollow-eyed survivors, their bodies ravaged by hunger and sorrow. John and Thomas step out from their hut, squinting in the radiant sunlight like beings from another realm. The village stands as a mere spectre of its previous vibrancy, with once bustling streets now hauntingly silent. Nevertheless, amid this devastation, flickers of hope emerge. The fields, neglected for far too long, are starting to show signs of new life. The wail of a baby resonates through the deserted avenues, a token that existence persists, even in the face of overwhelming tragedy. John takes Thomas by the hand, guiding him into the fields. They stand side by side, surveying the land that has been both their source of sustenance and their burden for countless years. "We will rebuild," John says softly, his voice laced with emotion. "We will pay tribute to those we have lost by striving to live our best lives." Thomas nods, his youthful face marked with a seriousness that belies his age. He understands that the journey ahead will be tough, that the remnants of the plague will remain long after the last victim has been laid to rest. Yet, he also knows that he has his father at his side, a man who has faced the unthinkable and emerged stronger. Together, they will confront whatever obstacles lie ahead, bound by family ties and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. As they turn back toward the village, ready to embark on the slow, arduous journey of rebuilding, the sun breaks through the clouds, casting a warm golden glow over the land. It is a small gesture, a fleeting moment of beauty in a world that has seen so much darkness. Yet for John and Thomas, it serves as a beacon of hope, a reassurance that even in the bleakest of times, the potential for a brighter tomorrow always exists. The years gradually pass, and the village starts to mend, albeit slowly and with great difficulty. New families begin to settle in the deserted huts, bringing with them the joyful sounds of children playing in the streets once more. Crops are sown and harvested, as the natural rhythm of the seasons asserts itself, despite the profound losses endured. John and Thomas labor together, their relationship more resilient than ever. Thomas matures into a strong and skilled young man, his hands roughened from working in the fields for many years. Yet the lessons from those grim plague days remain etched in his mind. He understands the importance of family and community when faced with challenges. Observing his children frolicking in the village square, Thomas often recalls a long-ago discussion with his father about finding a trade for himself. He realizes now that escape from the land is a myth, with no straightforward route to a more prosperous life. Nevertheless, he finds dignity in their labor, the sweat and effort required to extract life from the unforgiving soil. He takes pride in the calluses that mark his hands and the fatigue that settles in his back after a long day's work. When the Lord demands his share of the harvest, Thomas meets his gaze with unwavering resolve. He is aware of the systemic injustices and the harsh treatment reserved for those who dare to oppose it, yet he is also conscious of the strength within him, the enduring ties of family and community that have carried them through the most challenging times. He accepts the weight of responsibility, just as his father did before him, so that one day his own children can aspire to a better life. As the sun dips below the horizon, Thomas heads back to his modest home, where his wife has prepared a simple meal, a reflection of their toil. They share their dinner in a comfortable silence, the love shared between them radiating warmth amidst the flickering candlelight. Later, as they lie together in the darkness, Thomas pulls his wife close, feeling her chest rise and fall rhythmically against him. He understands that their existence is a tough one, riddled with insecurity and grief. Yet he also acknowledges that it's a life worth embracing, showcasing the enduring resilience of the human spirit. As he drifts into slumber, he envisions an improved world, one in which his descendants may eventually experience genuine freedom and abundance. It's a distant aspiration, as far away as the twinkling stars that rotate in the boundless sky above. Nevertheless, it's a vision worth cherishing, a flicker of hope in a realm that can often seem profoundly bleak. Thus, the cycle persists, the seasons flowing in their perpetual rhythm. The serfs labor and strive, bearing the burdens of an inequitable system with a quiet, unwavering grace. They discover happiness in the little moments, in familial love and the beauty of a sunset illuminating the fields. Through it all they persevere, their spirits unshattered by the trials they encounter. They serve as the backbone of this land, the pulsating heart that sustains it through its darkest hours. As we prepare to leave this modest village, we take with us the tales of those who came before, the elations and heartaches that mold their lives. We are reminded of the resilience of the human spirit, the unyielding ties of love and community that can guide us through even the most challenging nights. Even as the world shifts, as empires rise and wane, these fundamental truths endure, a beacon of light in an unpredictable realm. Let us hold tight to them, these humble serfs and their steadfast strength, for ultimately it is they who will prevail long after the lords and ladies have turned to dust. They will carry forth the flame of hope into a brighter future, their spirits eternally undaunted, forever free. As we close our eyes and drift into the land of dreams, we carry the echoes of their narratives, the whispers of their experiences. We are reminded of the beauty and the heartache, the joy and the suffering that comprise the fabric of human life. And at that moment we connect with them, these simple serfs from a bygone era. Their hardships reflect our own, and their victories resonate with us. We are intertwined by the universal themes of love and loss, hope and trepidation. So let us find peace now, assured that we are part of something larger, a narrative that stretches back through time and will endure long after we depart. Let us draw strength from the quiet resilience of those who have come before us and hold on to the hope of a brighter future. While we slumber, may we envision that world, a place where the bonds of oppression are finally severed, where every man, woman and child can experience the joy of true freedom. This is a dream worth nurturing, a vision that will illuminate even the darkest nights and usher us into the dawn of new beginnings. So rest now, weary traveler, and let the tales from the past lull you to sleep. For in the end, it is these stories that persist, the narratives of love and loss, hope and heartbreak that reverberate through time. And as long as those narratives are shared, honored and held dear, the spirits of those ancient serfs will never completely fade. They will resonate within us, in the quiet resolve that helps us endure the darkest moments. So drift off now, and dream of a world where the lessons of history are remembered, woven intricately into the fabric of our lives, a tapestry of hope and resilience that will last through the ages. Let's return to the young blacksmith's apprentice we encountered previously, laboring long hours in the stifling forge. His hands bear the marks of hard work, blisters and calluses, while his face glistens with soot and sweat. The tasks are arduous and monotonous, shaping horseshoes, nails, tools and weapons for the manor and community. Yet he understands that this is his singular opportunity to escape the monotony of serfdom. The blacksmith is a stern master, quick to chastise the boy for any error or delay. But he also imparts the trade secrets, detailing how to heat the metal just right, folding it repeatedly until it transforms into something both strong and flexible. The boy observes in wonder as the blacksmith shapes a lustrous sword for the lord, the metal shimmering like water in the warm embrace of the coals. He envisions a day when his own creations will be just as exquisite and highly coveted. Yet, the path ahead is fraught with uncertainty. As an apprentice, the boy is essentially an indentured servant, tied to his master for years with only a meager allowance for food and shelter. He rests on a straw mattress in the rear of the forge, waking before dawn to kindle the flames and start the day's tasks. His hands never seem to be completely free of the black soot embedded in the fissures and folds of his skin. Even if he succeeds in completing his apprenticeship and advances to journeyman status, challenges still await him. The guilds strictly regulate who is permitted to practice each craft and establish their own shop. They dictate prices, quality standards, and limit competition. To progress, the boy must adeptly maneuver through this intricate maze of regulations and politics. He will need to pay significant fees, produce an exceptional piece to demonstrate his talent, and win the favor of the guild leaders. Many aspiring artisans find themselves trapped at this stage, unable to bear the financial burdens of launching their own business. If the young man does attain the rank of master blacksmith with his forge, he'll encounter the everyday hurdles of managing A medieval enterprise, securing raw materials like iron ore and charcoal that the affluent merchants control, attracting customers, negotiating prices and payments, repairing and replacing tools, and overseeing apprentices of his own, all while trying to scrape together a modest livelihood for himself and his family. Looming over it all is the spectre of illness, accidents and financial ruin. A significant ailment could render him unable to work, leaving him with no savings to fall back on. An accident at the forge due to hot metal or sharp tools could lead to severe injury or even death. A noble client who refuses to settle his bill might push him towards financial ruin. Lacking any social safety net, a single stroke of bad luck could send him plummeting back into the depths of poverty. As the apprentice rests on his rough straw mattress after yet another grueling day, working out the knots in his sore muscles, he ponders if it's truly worth it. To live as a serf is to endure a hard and grim existence filled with relentless labor and no prospect for betterment. Yet being a craftsman means straddling a precarious line between moderate success and absolute poverty. Both journeys appear laden with hardships and suffering. Still, as he closes his eyes and drifts off into slumber, the young man cannot help but envision a brighter tomorrow. He dreams of owning his own workshop, a warm blaze in the forge, a row of polished blades and durable tools ready for eager buyers. A lovely wife, healthy children, and a snug cottage featuring glass windows and food on the table. A sense of dignity and respect from those around him. A life where his hard work and expertise yield more than mere scraps of bread and a kick from his master. It may seem far off and unlikely, but it remains a far sweeter aspiration than that of any serf lying in muddy fields. The following day, as the apprentice plunges the glowing red metal into the water, causing a hiss and a plume of steam, he will hold tightly to that dream. He'll allow it to propel him through the agony in his arms, the burns on his fingers, and the reprimands from the blacksmith. Like the sword he is learning to craft, he will be hammered, folded, and hammered once more. Each trial will help mold him, shape him, making him more resilient and sharper, perhaps sharp enough to sever the chains of his origins and carve out a new path. Only time, persistent effort, and determination will reveal the outcome. As the Black Death ravages through Europe in the mid-14th century, no corner of society finds refuge from its destruction. Yet it is the destitute and powerless who bear the harshest brunt. The serfs packed themselves into celebrated hovels, the artisans toiled in cramped workshops, the beggars and street children lurked in the shadows of alleyways. They are the first to succumb to illness. Their undernourished bodies provide scant resistance against disease, and they are often the last to receive assistance, medicine, or relief in a society where such resources are predominantly allocated to the affluent. Our blacksmith's apprentice observes in dread as the plague inches closer to his village. Initially, it is travelers who bring tales of a peculiar illness from far-off regions, of towns sealing their gates, of mass graves overflowing with corpses. Then those who escape the contaminated areas begin to arrive, desperate for sustenance and shelter, some already exhibiting signs of fever and boils. The manor lord commands their rejection, yet it is too late. The contagion infiltrates silently, a flea on a rat, a cough carried by the breeze. Soon the first villagers become ill, a shepherd boy, a washerwoman, a friar. Their families attempt to conceal the illness, fearing stigma and isolation. But the affliction cannot be hidden as it spreads rapidly through the tightly clustered huts and streets. The symptoms are unmistakable and horrifying, painful egg-sized lumps in the armpits and groin, oozing pus and blood. Dark splotches beneath the skin, indicating internal bleeding, intense fever and vomiting, delirium and suffering. The blacksmith succumbs quickly, his robust body ravaged by the illness. The apprentice strives to tend to him, bringing water to ease his thirst, masking the odor of sickness with herbs, desperately praying to every saint he knows. Yet it is futile. Within days, the once strong and vital man becomes a trembling, raving shell of himself. His skin marred with hemorrhages. He dies in torment, choking on his own bloodied bile. The boy can scarcely grasp the loss of his mentor before others in the household become ill. The blacksmith's wife, his young children, the other apprentices. One by one they fade away, Much like blossoms wilting beneath an unrelenting sun, the forge lies cold and quiet, tools accumulating dust. Unfinished projects sit neglected on the workbench. There are no patrons to be found. The village resembles a deserted ghost town. The healthy remain barricaded within their homes, while the ailing moan in the streets. In a state of desperation, the village priest summoned a plague doctor from the city. The doctor arrives donned in a distinctive beaked mask and flowing dark robes, a sinister bird-like figure, appearing more as a harbinger of doom than a rescuer. The mask is filled with straw, herbs and spices, believed to cleanse the putrid humours responsible for the illness. Yet to the apprentice, it feels as though death itself has arrived, a grim reaper on its rounds. The physician begins his work, relying more on superstition than scientific knowledge. He ignites bonfires to purify the foul air. He prescribes concoctions of mercury, arsenic and powdered unicorn horn. He lances the buboes to release the noxious vapours and cauterizes the wounds with a heated iron. The screams of his patients echo in agony, the treatment nearly as horrific as the illness itself. More frequently, he simply aims to allow them to pass away with opiates and prayers. The apprentice witnesses no indication of the disease letting up. The death toll rises steadily with each passing day, with corpses accumulating faster than they can be buried. Carts rumble through the streets, the drivers calling out, "Bring out your dead." Grieving families toss their loved ones into mass graves, unable to hold proper funerals or grieve. Some families choose to seal the sick inside their homes, isolating them to avoid contagion, letting them die alone. Others abandon the afflicted on the roadside, or even in a fit of madness, accuse them of witchcraft and attack them. As more lives are lost, the very fabric of society begins to crumble. With countless becoming ill or fleeing, there aren't enough. Healthy individuals to tend the fields, keep the forges operating, weave the cloth or guard the towns. Crops rot on the vine and livestock wander aimlessly. Crops rot on the vine and livestock wander aimlessly. The manor lord retreats into his stronghold, stationing archers to shoot any ailing peasants who dare approach in search of help. Meanwhile, wandering bands of robbers attack travelers and vulnerable villages. Some indulge in wild revelry, drinking, and feasting, justifying their actions with the belief that they could face death tomorrow. Others succumb to despair and madness, donning sackcloth and whipping themselves in penance, becoming flagellants as they wander the land. Amidst all this, the apprentice somehow persists, caring for his ailing household while his tools remain untouched. As the Black Death gradually diminishes over the months, leaving half the village deceased, he contemplates what purpose he has left. His master, friends, and sense of purpose, all lost to the relentless plague. He finds himself isolated and adrift. The aspirations he once held have turned to nothing but ashes and dust. Yet as a heavy numbness envelops him, an unexpected thought ignites amidst his sorrow. He is alive. Against all odds, he continues to exist. The disease did not claim him. His vigorous youth, shaped by long hours at the forge, has proven its resilience. As the initial shock fades, a glimmer of determination begins to stir in his heart. He is the last one remaining. It falls on him now to rebuild and gather the pieces. With trembling hands, the apprentice slowly dons his apron and takes up his hammer. The cool metal feels familiar and grounding in his grip. He works the bellows and watches the coals ignite, a small sun emerging in the darkness. He is now without a master. It is time for him to become his own. No customers and no coin are present. He must forge something from nothing. Lacking a blueprint or any plans, he must navigate his own path. Yet as he draws the glowing iron from the forge and places it on the anvil, he senses a flicker of something that might be hope. The world has crumbled into dust around him, but from those ashes and dust, the blacksmith knows that new creations can emerge. Just as the plague ravaged the land, cleansing the old order, perhaps it has also paved the way for something new. A fresh start, an opportunity to reconstruct from the ashes. Each time he strikes the metal, the apprentice channels his sorrow, his fury, and his unwavering desire to persevere into the iron. He is uncertain of the outcome, a tool, a weapon, a charm, yet he knows it will embody a fragment of his unyielding spirit, tough and bright. a symbol of humanity's capacity to endure, to craft significance and beauty even amidst profound despair. The scourge of the plague has receded, leaving a fractured world in its path. However, within a modest forge, a flame remains alive, igniting a spark of resolve. The apprentice may not know what lies ahead. Still, he understands he will confront it as the blacksmith faces the metal with effort, expertise, and unbreakable determination, pressing on into the unknown. The 100 Years' War raged through medieval Europe like an uncontrollable blaze, engulfing lives, resources, and hope with equal intensity. What began as a dispute over the French crown developed into a struggle spanning generations as the rulers of England and France fought for dominance. Yet, as always, it was the ordinary people who bore the heaviest toll. Displaced from their homes, drafted into warfare, caught in the relentless machinery of clashing noble interests, our young blacksmith, still grappling with the aftermath of the Black Death, finds himself ensnared in this tempest of violence. With the ranks of soldiers reduced by illness, the local lord conscripts every able man to bolster his army. The smith, with his formidable strength and knowledge of weapons, is an obvious target. He is ripped from his forge and provided with a battered second-hand sword, a low-quality metal helmet, and a piece of rusting chainmail, offering scant defense against the arrows, blades, and bludgeons of battle. The apprentice-turned-soldier marches away to engage in a fight he scarcely comprehends for a cause that holds no significance for him. He leaves behind his village, his forge, and the dwindling aspirations of the life he once envisioned. He is now a pawn on the Lord's chessboard, just another cog in the feudal war machine. His desires and welfare hardly factor into their calculations. Countless warm bodies are ready to be sacrificed in battle. He gathers with other conscripts around pitiful campfires, a ragtag group of farmers, workers, merchants, and beggars. They share a common thread of grime, hunger, and fear, bound together only by their lowly status and the whims of their superiors. Whispers of the English army's size circulate among them, along with tales of their fearsome longbowmen and the innovative cannons that belch forth iron and fire. While some boast of the glory and riches to be gained, most merely pray for survival, hoping to return to their homes and families. The harsh truth of combat shatters even those modest aspirations. The young blacksmith finds himself amidst a muddy battlefield in Craw, a small village that will become significant in the annals of history. It's swelteringly hot, the sunlight scorching the men's skin, horses drenched in sweat. The English hold the advantageous high ground, yet the French, knights proud and reckless, insist on charging ahead. The first line surges forward, a mass of steel and horseflesh, only to be mowed down like wheat by a storm of arrows from the English longbows. The knights collide with their own foot soldiers, trampling them in their frantic retreat. The second wave meets a similar fate, as fallen steeds and soldiers become obstacles for the next wave. It is utter chaos. The once mighty flower of French chivalry wilts in the span of an afternoon. For the blacksmith and his compatriots, it is a nightmarish vision. Horses scream and thrash in the mud, pierced by arrows, their shining armor laid, bare to reveal gruesome injuries underneath. Limbs and heads lie scattered like chaff. The ground is transformed into a horrible mix of guts and dirt, punctuated by the relentless hiss and whir of arrows, reminiscent of monstrous insects. The stench of blood, excrement, smoke, and metal fills the roasting air. The ghastly sound of iron clashing with bone reverberates incessantly. The apprentice battles not for honor or patriotism, but for the very essence of his life. Any thoughts of valor or glory abandon him, leaving solely the most primitive instinct for survival. He flails his sword unpredictably, awkwardly, in a desperate attempt to fend off the English men-at-arms who threaten to impale him. His shoulders throb with pain. He breathes in sharp, uneven gasps. Sweat and smoke sting his eyes. He loses his footing in the muck, succumbing to a rush of retreating soldiers, terrified of being trampled. By the time he manages to rise, the day's outcome is irrevocably doomed. The French are in full flight. His only comfort is that he is escaping as well, bloodied and bruised, yet somehow still alive. As the young smith stumbles away from the battlefield, he ponders whether survival truly qualifies as a mercy. He witnesses sights that will haunt him indefinitely. images that will invade his nightmares both when awake and asleep for years to come. The contorted faces of the deceased, the haunting cries of the wounded, the casual brutality of warfare extinguishing lives like flickering lights. He has crafted exquisite steel blades, but has never comprehended their ultimate purpose: to tear, to pierce, to kill. In the crucible of battle, he has glimpsed the chasm of human savagery, a transformation that will remain with him forever. The return to his village is a lengthy and harrowing journey. They have no triumph to recount, no glory associated with their names, merely the horrors they have both witnessed and inflicted. The lords in their lofty castles might lift their goblets in celebration and devise strategies for the next confrontation. But for the pawns on the battlefield, the foot soldiers, the archers, the blacksmith now warrior, war leaves only scars and echoes, tormenting their sleep and shadowing their days. Upon returning to his forge, the young smith finds it cold, and his tools rusty. The bright future he once envisioned now feels like a cruel mockery. His fields are overgrown, abandoned while he fought for the sake of his lord. His scant savings are depleted. He'll have to start anew from ground zero. This time he possesses hands that tremble as they grasp the hammer and ears that resonate with the haunting echoes of bowstrings. A heart scorched by pain he never chose. He picks up his tools, for he has no alternative. Yet he is transformed, an older, tougher version of himself, shaped by the crucible of illness and conflict. The 100 Years' War will relentlessly continue, an insatiable force devouring lives and shattered dreams. Monarchs and realms will rise and fall. The manor system formed the foundation of feudal society in medieval Europe. At the core of each manor stood the Lord's Keep, a sturdy stone structure that functioned as a residence and symbolized authority. Encircling the keep were the simpler abodes of the serfs, small one-room huts constructed from mud and thatch. These homes clustered together in a village, complete with a communal well and perhaps a modest church. The serfs were tied to the land, bound by a tangled web of obligations to their lord. In return for a small piece of land to cultivate for their own needs, they were required to labor in the lord's fields, remitting rent in the form of crops and toil. Their freedom and autonomy were severely restricted. The law controlled where they could reside, whom they could marry, and even the types of crops they were permitted to grow. It was a strict social hierarchy, with each individual's role and status predetermined by birth. At the bottom of this hierarchy lay the serfs, the most impoverished and oppressed class, laboring tirelessly from dawn to dusk. At the pinnacle were the nobles, enjoying vast landholdings, exquisite attire, and sumptuous feasts. Following them were the clergy, who wielded considerable power through the church. It was a strict social hierarchy, with each individual's role and status predetermined by birth. At the bottom of this hierarchy lay the serfs, the most impoverished and oppressed class, laboring tirelessly from dawn to dusk. The lord and lady of this particular manor were a superficial and petty duo, preoccupied with preserving their status and reputation, always striving to outshine neighboring noble families through ostentatious displays of wealth and authority. The Lord Sir Reginald was known for his ruthlessness and lack of empathy, quick to wrath yet slow to show mercy. He thought nothing of chastising a serf for the most minor offences, a stray pig wandering into his gardens, an imagined slight to his authority. The consequences were severe and degrading, often involving public beatings or confinement in the stocks. Lady Eloise, his wife, was equally as unsympathetic. She spent her days engaged in trivial gossip and needlework, perpetually grumbling about the poor quality of the meals and the perceived laziness of the servants. She insisted on the highest quality silks and furs, unconcerned about the costs or the burden it placed on the serfs, whose hard work funded her extravagances. Together, Lord Reginald and Lady Eloise ruled their small estate with unyielding authority, extracting every ounce of labour and loyalty from their beleaguered subjects. Life on the manor was an unending cycle of toil, broken only by the rare feast day or wedding celebration. The serfs were effectively treated as property, possessing few rights and scant means to oppose the whims and brutality of their lord and lady. Born into a life of servitude, most never experienced a different existence. One of these serfs was a young man named John. John had been raised on the manor, witnessing his father and grandfather bow and beg before the Lord, laboring relentlessly in the fields to earn a meager living. In his youth, John had dreamed of a different future, aspiring to become a warrior or a merchant, longing to explore the world beyond the narrow confines of his village. Yet, as he matured, he recognized the futility of those ambitions. He found himself a serf bound to the land by birthright and obligations, without any hope for liberation. John's situation worsened when Lord Reginald chose to organize an extravagant feast for the neighboring nobles. He sought to dazzle them with his affluence and generosity, aiming to demonstrate that he was a significant power to be reckoned with. However, throwing such a feast entailed considerable costs, and Lord Reginald was not inclined to dip into his own wealth. Instead, he raised the rents and taxes imposed on his serfs, demanding greater portions of their crops and labor. John's family was already struggling to make ends meet, and this additional weight proved unbearable. They were forced to decide between paying their dues and securing enough food. The stress and overwork took a toll on John's father, who fell gravely ill and, lacking access to proper medicine, quickly perished. With this loss, John found himself the head of the family, responsible for his mother and younger siblings. In a fit of desperation and anger, John made an impulsive choice. Under the cover of night, he sneaked into Lord Reginald's granary and took a sack of grain. This small act of rebellion was a way to sustain his family for a short while, but it also constituted a serious offense. When the theft came to light, Lord Reginald was outraged. John was brought before him and compelled to admit his wrongdoing. Before the entire village, he was stripped to the waist and bound to a post. Lord Reginald himself delivered the punishment, striking John's back with a viciousness fueled by his wounded pride. The severity of the punishment was shocking, far disproportionate to the offense he had committed. By the end of it, John's back was a raw, bleeding mass, and he struggled to keep his feet beneath him. He was then tossed into a damp cell to recover, forced to rest on a bed of moldy straw, sustained only by stale bread and water. As he lay there, half out of his mind from pain and fever, John cursed the injustice he faced. His only crime was stealing to provide for his starving family, and for that he had been nearly beaten to death. Meanwhile, Lord Reginald enjoyed a feast of roast pheasant and fine wine, oblivious to the serfs whose labor underpinned his opulent lifestyle. It was a harsh, unfair system, and John felt its oppressive weight pressing down upon him. Yet what could he do? He was merely one man, a lowly serf without power or influence. He understood that any further acts of defiance would only bring about more suffering for him and his loved ones. And so, with a heavy heart, John came to accept his fate. He would persist in laboring in the fields, bowing and scraping before his lord and lady, enduring the challenges and humiliations of life as a serf. As he succumbed to an uneasy slumber, John's final thoughts lingered on his father, who had worked himself to an early demise, and his own children, who were destined to face the same grim reality. It was an unending cycle of poverty and oppression that appeared impossible to escape, a burden that would weigh down generations to follow. In that moment, the perceived grandeur and chivalry of the feudal system felt like a cruel illusion. And John wept, not only for himself but for all the countless nameless serfs who labored under its weight. Yet, even within the depths of his despair, he clung to a faint glimmer of hope. He had caught wind of whispers of change stirring in the air of peasant uprisings in distant lands, and the emergence of a new class of artisans and merchants in the towns. Perhaps with time the old establishment would falter, and a new, fairer society would rise from its ashes. It was a fragile aspiration, but it was all he could hold on to in the darkness. As the years went by, John's wounds healed, yet the memory of his brutal punishment lingered, serving as a constant reminder of his position in the world, of the vast divide between the high and the low. He married and had children of his own, watching with a heavy heart as they took their places in the fields beside him. Naturally, there were fleeting moments of happiness, the birth of a healthy child, a particularly fruitful harvest, the rare day of feasting when work ceased and ale flowed freely. Still, these were brief respites in a life of relentless toil and struggle, with the spectres of hunger, disease, and the Lord's wrath ever looming, poised to snatch away the little comforts they had managed to piece together. As John aged, he began to feel the toll that a lifetime of labor had taken on his body. His hands had become gnarled and calloused, his back bent from countless years of laboring in the fields. He observed his children grow up, stepping into the relentless cycle of poverty and servitude, which filled him with profound sorrow. Yet, amidst this despair, he also sensed a flicker of something more, a small, tenacious spark of hope and resilience. Despite all the challenges and injustices they faced, the serfs of the manor formed a tight-knit community held together by their shared struggles and acts of kindness. They supported one another, pooling their meager resources in difficult times and celebrating life's small joys together whenever possible. In this unity, John discovered a form of strength. It wasn't the might of kings or knights, but the quiet, enduring strength that comes from being an ordinary person. It was the resolve to rise each morning and tackle another day of exhausting work, to carve out moments of laughter and love amid the hardships, and to hold on to dreams of a better life, even when despair surrounded them. As he lay on his deathbed, encircled by his children and grandchildren, John reflected on his life. Though it had been filled with struggle and hardship, it was also a life lived with principles, a steadfast refusal to allow the world's cruelties to extinguish his spirit. Perhaps that was his most significant legacy. Rather than riches or status, it was the simple, unwavering dignity of a life led well despite adversity. As he took his final breaths, John envisioned a future where his descendants might experience a different reality, one liberated from the bonds of servitude, where one's value wasn't shackled to the circumstances of their birth. It was a far-off dream, yet one worth clinging to even in times of darkness. With that last quiet hope, John slipped away, leaving behind a world that would continue to spin on, season after season, through the endless rhythm of planting and harvesting, birth and death, rebirth and renewal. The manor and its occupants persisted as they always had, discovering fleeting moments of grace and beauty amidst the adversity, hoping for the day when the old regime might ultimately yield to the new. The existence of a peasant farmer in medieval Europe was one characterized by relentless toil and difficulty. From dawn to dusk, they toiled in the fields, their hands calloused and blistered from handling rudimentary tools. The plough, a basic wooden apparatus, was drawn by an ox or horse if the farmer was fortunate enough to possess one. More frequently, the farmer and his family would drag the plough through the stubborn soil by themselves, their muscles straining with every step. The crops they cultivated were scarce and rudimentary: wheat, barley, rye, and perhaps some vegetables if they had extra land. The harvest was always uncertain, perpetually subject to the whims of weather and pests. A poor harvest meant facing hunger and an inability to pay rent and taxes owed to the manor's lord. It was a fragile existence, always one bad season away from disaster. Even during prosperous years, a peasant's life was one of mere survival. The majority of what they harvested went to the lord as compensation for living and working on his property, leaving them with just sufficient sustenance for themselves. Even then, their meals were unvaried and dull: bread made from coarse grains, pottages of vegetables and beans, and occasionally a scrap of meat or cheese if they were lucky. The work was unyielding and grueling, consisting of ploughing, sowing, weeding, and harvesting, with only rudimentary hand tools at their disposal. There were no rest days, no reprieve from the continuous labor. Even children as young as 5 or 6 would be set to work, scaring away birds or collecting fallen grain from the fields. Elderly family members who could no longer manage the strenuous work would spin wool or engage in other handicrafts to contribute. Their living conditions were cramped and squalid. The peasant family would reside in a small one-room hut, the walls made of wattle and daub. The roof was thatched with straw. The floor consisted of dirt layered with rushes or straw that would inevitably become filthy and plagued over time. There was no privacy and no respite from the odors and sounds of the livestock that frequently occupied the same space. Disease lurked as a persistent threat, exacerbated by poor hygiene and sanitation. Dysentery, typhoid, and various other ailments spread rapidly in cramped conditions and tainted water. Injuries resulting from farm work were prevalent, and there was minimal, effective medical care, limited mostly to herbal treatments and petitions to a higher power. Even a minor cut could lead to infection and potentially be deadly. A fractured bone could render a person disabled for life. Amidst all these challenges, the peasants sought solace in their faith and family. The church held out the promise of a better existence after death, serving as a reward for their struggles in the here and now. Marriages and births sparked celebrations, offering fleeting moments of respite from the relentless toil. Yet these joys were often overshadowed by the stark realities of their existence. Many children did not reach adulthood, falling victim to illness or malnutrition. Women frequently died during childbirth, prompting their husbands to remarry, out of necessity. The elderly, too weak to contribute, were often regarded as burdens, another mouth to feed in an already resource-strapped world. Nonetheless, the peasants persevered. Year after grueling year, they unearthed small pockets of joy when they could, whether it was a bountiful harvest, a juicy piece of gossip, or a lively melody played on a handmade instrument. They shared stories and sang songs to pass the time and lighten their burdens, even if just momentarily. Yet, always looming over them was the spectre of the Lord, his manor perched on the hill, a persistent reminder of their standing within. The strict social hierarchy. They were tethered to him and the land with little hope of altering their fate. The Lord dictated every aspect of their lives, from the crops they cultivated to the unions they formed. Yet, always looming over them, was the spectre of the Lord, his manor perched on the hill, a persistent reminder of their standing within the strict social hierarchy. They were tethered to him and the land, with little hope of altering their fate. The Lord dictated every aspect of their lives, from the crops they cultivated to the unions they formed. The peasants were serfs, fundamentally tied to the land and subject to the Lord's authority, unable to depart the manor without his consent. This arrangement resembled a system of slavery, a servitude that was inherited from parent to child. The Lord had the power to punish them for any imagined offense, whether it was neglecting tax obligations or hunting game in his woods. The consequences could be severe, varying from fines to corporal punishment to confinement in the stocks. Yet, despite the harsh conditions imposed by their lord, the peasants were even more fearful of the disorder that lurked beyond their manorial walls. Tales circulated of marauding bands and entire villages devastated by plague or famine. At least within the manor, there was a degree of stability and safety, albeit at the expense of their liberties. Thus, these resilient men and women persisted, making do with a life on the fringes of society. They witnessed the conflicts and intrigues of the nobility, yet they were seldom directly affected. Their immediate concerns revolved around the weather, the harvest, and the well-being of their livestock. Nevertheless, even the most downtrodden peasant could harbor dreams of a brighter future, despite knowing it was likely unattainable. Perhaps their descendants would be the ones to break free from the chains of serfdom and forge their paths as skilled craftspeople or prosperous merchants. It was a faint glimmer of hope, often their sole anchor in a world indifferent to their plight. Thus they labored day in and day out, season after season, their lives serving as a testament to the unyielding human spirit in the face of daunting adversity. Though the life of the peasant farmer was fraught with hardship, others within medieval society faced even greater trials and humiliations. Serfs were bound to their land, prohibited from leaving the manor without their lord's approval. They were obligated to labor a designated number of days each week on the lord's land, frequently in conjunction with tending to their own modest plots. This work was unpaid, serving as a form of rent for the privilege of residing and farming on the lord's estate. Yet the responsibilities of a serf extended well beyond mere physical labor. They faced a bewildering multitude of taxes and fees imposed on everything, from the crops they harvested to the livestock they butchered. If a serf passed away without an heir, their belongings would revert to the lord. Should a serf commit an offense, they could endure consequences as harsh as execution. Existence as a serf was characterized by relentless fear and vulnerability. They possessed no rights and had no means to challenge the caprices and harshness of their lord. They could be traded like livestock, with families torn apart at the lord's discretion. Even their private lives were under the Lord's jurisdiction. A serf could not marry without prior approval, and the Lord held the power to choose their spouses. Any children born to a serf couple automatically inherited that same servitude. It was a grim life, one that offered scant hope for escape or improvement. Some serfs attempted to flee, yearning for a better life in towns or cities. Yet if captured, the repercussions were severe. A returned serf could anticipate a brutal flogging at the minimum, while habitual offenders might have their feet amputated or be executed as a warning to others. Despite these dangers, the yearning for freedom burned fiercely. Historical accounts note instances of serfs organizing small-scale revolts, refusing to perform their labor or pay their taxes. However, such uprisings were swiftly and mercilessly crushed by the Lord and his knights. The narrative of one notable serf rebellion has endured through history, a testament to the desperation and courage of those who dared to stand against their lord. It unfolded in a small English village, akin to countless others scattered throughout the medieval landscape. The serfs of this village had long endured the oppressive dominance of their lord, a man notorious for both his cruelty and unpredictable temper. Known for his severe punishments and endless greed, he continually raised their taxes, often leaving them with scarcely enough to provide for their families. He seized the finest of their harvests and livestock for his own gain, leaving them with only the scraps. Following a notably poor harvest, the Lord demanded even more from his serfs, instructing them to labor in his fields from dawn until dusk, without any breaks or sustenance. This demand became the tipping point for the suffering villagers. He seized the finest of their harvests and livestock for his own gain, leaving them with only the scraps. Following a notably poor harvest, the Lord demanded even more from his serfs, instructing them to labor in his fields from dawn until dusk, without any breaks or sustenance. This demand became the tipping point for the suffering villagers. A young man named John emerged as their leader, rallying a group of serfs who resolved to take action. They refused to head to the fields, instead congregating in the village square, calling for an end to their mistreatment. News of their defiance spread rapidly, attracting serfs from nearby estates, swelling their numbers to over 100. Infuriated by this unprecedented act of rebellion, the Lord summoned his knights to suppress the uprising. The armored warriors rode into the village, swords and lances drawn. Yet the serfs, armed with nothing but their farming tools and fierce determination, stood their ground. A fierce battle ensued, with the serfs fighting with a desperate bravery stemming from years of oppression. Some fell to the knights' swords, their blood soaking the muddy terrain, while others managed to unseat their foes, shifting the momentum of the conflict. Ultimately, the serfs emerged triumphant, forcing the Lord and his men to retreat in chaos. This stunning victory was a spark of hope in a world that offered so little. Yet their success was short-lived. News of the rebellion quickly spread, prompting other lords to dispatch their knights to restore order. The rebels were captured and brought before a swiftly arranged court, where they were sentenced to death for their rebellion. John, the young leader of the resistance, was singled out for a particularly severe punishment. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered. His dismembered parts were put on display as a grim warning to any potential rebels. The other serfs met similarly horrific ends, their fleeting experience of freedom extinguished by a wave of aristocratic retribution. The village was left shattered and intimidated, a vivid illustration of the merciless strength of the feudal system. Yet, the tale of John and his fellow insurrectionists persisted, murmured around firesides and handed down through the ages. It emerged as a beacon of the desire for liberty that resided even in the hearts of the most humble serf, a glimmer of hope amid the shadows of medieval tyranny. The feudal system that tethered serfs to the land and their lords was a complicated network of duties and traditions developed over hundreds of years. At its center lay the manor, a self-sustaining agricultural estate that was foundational to the medieval economy. The manor was governed by a lord who obtained the land from the king in return for military allegiance. The lord resided in the manor house, a fortified stone edifice that loomed over the landscape, symbolizing his dominion and control. Surrounding the manor house were fields, pastures, and forests that sustained the estate, tended to by the serfs who were bound to the land and required to contribute labor and a portion of their harvest to the Lord. The serfs lived in modest cottages clustered near the manor house, their lives dictated by the cycles of the farming year. They were stratified into several classes, each possessing distinct responsibilities and entitlements. At the lowest tier were the villains who essentially functioned as slaves tied to the land and lord for eternity. They held no rights and could be traded like property. Above them were the bordars and cotters, who enjoyed slightly more autonomy, yet remained bound to the manor and subject to the lord's whims. Higher up were the freemen who possessed their lands through rent rather than toil, and had greater legal rights. Nonetheless, they too were not entirely unshackled, still owing loyalty and service to their lord. The manor functioned as a self-sufficient entity, complete with its own church, mill, blacksmith, and various craftsmen. The lord oversaw all aspects, administering justice in the manor court and gathering rents and taxes from his tenants. This system persisted for centuries, offering a degree of stability and safety amid a landscape filled with turmoil and violence. Nevertheless, it also fostered inequality and exploitation, with the vast majority of individuals existing in a cycle of perpetual servitude. For the serfs, life in the manor involved a continuous fight for survival. They had to contend with the whims of the weather, the harvest yield, and the unpredictable nature of their lord. A poor harvest could spell disaster and starvation, while a fruitful one might afford a brief respite from relentless poverty. Their daily existence was regulated by a complex array of rules and customs, which varied from manor to manor. In certain regions, serfs were mandated to mill their grain at the lord's mill and bake their bread in his ovens, paying a fee for this right. In others, they were prohibited from gathering wood in the lord's forests or fishing in his streams. Disobeying these regulations could lead to severe repercussions, ranging from fines to flogging, or even imprisonment in the manor's dungeon. The lord wielded life and death over his serfs, exercising this power often with a ruthless efficiency. In spite of the adversities faced, there were still moments filled with joy and a sense of community within the manor. The church served as a hub for social interaction, with masses, feast days, and various festivals providing a welcome break from daily life. Celebrations such as weddings and christenings offered opportunities to feast and rejoice, even if the spread was modest by contemporary standards. Yet, the looming presence of the Lord served as a constant reminder of the strict social hierarchy that governed every facet of manor life. The Lord and his family inhabited a realm starkly different from that of the serfs, indulging in fine clothing, sumptuous meals, and leisurely activities. For a serf, even a fleeting view of this world served as a poignant reminder of their position in the hierarchy. They might catch a fleeting glance of the Lord's hunting entourage galloping out with their hounds and falcons, or hear the lively sounds of a celebration resonating from the manor house. Nevertheless, they understood that these indulgences were not meant for individuals like them. One particular feast has been passed down through the ages, illustrating the opulence and excess that starkly contrasts with the daily lives of the serfs who made such an event possible. It was the wedding banquet of the Lord's eldest son, a grand event that spanned 3 days and nights. No expense was spared in the planning, as the finest delicacies and wines were sourced from across the realm. The manor's kitchen buzzed with activity, where cooks and assistants labored tirelessly to prepare the banquet. Whole oxen and pigs were roasted on spits, while smaller game birds were crafted into pies and pastries. Fish caught from the estate's ponds were fried and served with sumptuous sauces, and platters overflowed with wheels of cheese and loaves of bread. For the serfs, this banquet stirred a mix of amazement and bitterness. They gazed in wonder at the lavish spread, so far removed from their own meager meals. Yet they also seethed at the irony, acutely aware that their hard labor had made such excess possible. As the festivities progressed, the sounds of music and merriment floated out from the manor, mixing with the clatter of dishes and the clinks of goblets. The lords and ladies danced and revelled, their ornate garments shimmering in the candlelight. Meanwhile, the serfs crowded in their cottages, their stomachs empty and hearts heavy. Some grumbled about the unfairness of it all, while others simply sighed and returned to their tasks, resigned to the status quo. In the end, the wedding banquet served as a stark representation of the significant divide between the lords and the serfs, a poignant reminder of the inflexible social order that pervaded every facet of medieval existence. It was a landscape, marked by vivid disparities, where the abundance enjoyed by a handful was sustained by the toil of the many. Yet, amid such disparities, the serfs discovered ways to rebel and reaffirm their dignity. They shared tales and sang melodies that ridiculed the arrogance of their lords, finding amusement and comfort in their collective struggle. They built close-knit communities, supporting one another, aware that in a world so hostile to their survival, they could only depend on each other. And during rare moments of resistance, they challenged the system that subjugated them. There were rumors of clandestine gatherings in the woods where serfs convened to strategize revolt and envision a brighter future. Some even dared to escape the manor, risking everything for a taste of freedom. Though most of these acts of defiance were minor and transient, quickly suppressed by the immense force of feudal authority, they served to highlight that even in the darkest eras, the human spirit could not be entirely extinguished. Existence for the serf on the manor was a continuous battle, a confrontation against nature, the lord, and the very system that bound them. Yet, it also illustrated the remarkable endurance and creativity of humanity, showcasing the ability to discover moments of joy and unity amid the most desolate conditions. Reflecting on the feudal society of the Middle Ages, it is easy to perceive only the oppression and anguish. Nonetheless, we must also acknowledge the quiet acts of rebellion and the resilient spirit of those who lived and perished under its weight. Their narratives may fade with time, but their legacy persists within the very fabric of our contemporary world, a world shaped by the struggles and sacrifices of innumerable forebears. By remembering them, we pay tribute to the unsung champions of history, the serfs and peasants who carried the burden of feudalism in both spirit and body. The Middle Ages were a period characterized by significant turmoil and transformation. As the feudal world began to unravel, towns and trade started to flourish for the serfs on the manor. This evolution presented both fresh opportunities and formidable difficulties. With the expansion of trade routes and the rise of urban centers, the demand for rural goods surged. Some lords began to recognize the advantages of granting their serfs greater liberty to cultivate and sell their products, understanding that this could enhance their own wealth and influence. Yet, amid the growing demand, the blacksmith's business faced mounting hardships. Once a thriving town, it had become little more than a faint echo of its previous vitality, its streets desolate and market stalls empty. The plague had inflicted a heavy toll, not only in terms of lives lost, but also on the fabric of society itself. With so many people gone, fewer customers were available to buy his products, fewer apprentices to train, and fewer hands to assist with the tasks at hand. He often found himself by the forge late into the nights, gazing into the flickering flames, reminiscing about happier days, the sound of his children's laughter, the warm touch of his wife's hand, the vibrant activity of the town square during market day. Now silence reigned, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the resounding clang of his hammer. Yet he continued to endure. He accepted any work he could find, mending farm tools and occasionally shoeing horses. He bartered his skills for food and supplies, trading with the few neighbors who remained. Gradually, albeit painfully, life moved forward. Still, even as the town began to heal, new trials arose. The ongoing conflict between England and France escalated, driving up the need for weapons and armor. The blacksmith was summoned by his lord to labor in the castle forge, churning out swords and shields for the troops. He toiled for extended hours in the stifling heat, his hands blistered and his back weary. The metal quality was substandard, and fuel for the forge was scarce. Nevertheless, he had no choice but to comply, fearing punishment or banishment. While he worked, he pondered the young men who would handle these weapons, setting off to a conflict they scarcely comprehended. Most were peasant boys, just like the son of the blacksmith. Untrained and ill-prepared, they would serve as fodder for the enemy's arrows and swords. The blacksmith had witnessed this tragedy during the last campaign. His own son, still too young to grow facial hair, had been summoned to fight for the Lord's cause. He departed with a rusty blade and a tattered gambeson, his eyes a mix of fear and excitement. For weeks the blacksmith had anxiously awaited news, his heart heavy with dread. Then, one drizzly morning, a ragged messenger arrived at the forge, bearing a small bundle of bloodied cloth. His son's scant belongings, the only remnants of a life cut short. The blacksmith had wept then, deep, wrenching sobs that shook him to his core. He cursed the lords and their petty disputes, condemned the war and its senselessness. Yet above all he cursed himself for his inability to shield his own flesh and blood. Now, as he forged another blade, he wondered how many more fathers would experience that same heartache. How many more sons would be claimed by the relentless cycle of war? It felt like an unending loop, a cruel jest of fate. Yet, what could a mere blacksmith do? He was entangled in the feudal system, a serf bound to the land and the whims of his lord. He had no influence over the decisions made by kings and nobles, no power to alter the tide of history. All he could do was keep his head down, focus on his tasks, and hope that someday things might change. As dusk fell beyond the castle walls, the blacksmith wiped the sweat and soot from his forehead. He gathered the completed swords, each a testament to his skill, even if the materials were inferior. He planned to deliver them to the armorer the following morning. Yet, as he trudged back to his desolate cottage, his mind was burdened with sorrow and acceptance. This was his reality, laboring and suffering like the countless forebears before him. He witnessed his loved ones fall victim to illness, hunger, and brutality. He toiled under the heavy yoke of labor and the oppressive hands of the manor's rule. And still, beneath the weight of despair, there burned a glimmer of hope, a tenacity that refused to be snuffed out, an unwavering will to persist, regardless of the challenges ahead. It was the same drive that had propelled his ancestors to clear the land, cultivate the earth, and construct the villages that graced the landscape. It encapsulated the essence of the peasant, the serf, the common folk, the ones who kept the wheels of society in motion while the lords and ladies indulged in revelry above, those who discovered joy in life's simple offerings, a hearty meal, a crackling fire, the affection of family and friends. As the blacksmith settled onto his straw mattress, his body weary from toil, he held onto that spirit as if it were a lifeline. He whispered a prayer for his son, for his wife, for all those who had perished at the hands of an unyielding history. He pledged to persevere, to continue fighting, to keep living no matter what adversities awaited him, for that was the only option laid before him. In a realm filled with chaos and unpredictability, of sickness, death, and ceaseless toil, the only unchanging factor was the unbreakable resolve of the human spirit. And as long as that fire flickered, hope for a brighter future remained. The blacksmith closed his eyes, allowing fatigue to consume him. As he fell into slumber, visions of a world where his children could flourish in safety and health danced in his mind, a world rich in abundance and liberty for all, a world where clashing swords would give way to ringing church bells, where mirth and melody would resonate through the streets. It was a beautiful vision, a fleeting glimpse of what might one day be, and yet the blacksmith was aware that it was merely a dream, yet he held on to it with all his strength, for in that moment, amidst the tranquil silence of the night, everything appeared achievable. Thus he succumbed to slumber, his breathing deep and even, his heart infused with a fragile yet fervent hope. Tomorrow would usher in new trials, fresh sorrows, and additional weights to carry. But for now, under the comforting veil of sleep, he could experience a fleeting moment of tranquility. Such was the fate of the medieval peasant, the overlooked, champion of history, the one who endured, pressed forward, and nurtured the spark of humanity during the bleakest of eras. Their narratives may have faded into obscurity, their names relegated to the margins of neglected texts, yet their influence continues to resonate in the very earth beneath our feet, in the blood that flows through our veins. We are the descendants of serfs, inheritors of countless generations of strife and sacrifice, and while our lives might be more manageable, our burdens lessened, we must always remember the gratitude we owe to those who came before us, the ones who constructed the very foundations of our society, brick by arduous brick. So let us pay tribute to them, these unsung champions of the Middle Ages. Let us commemorate their legacy, not with grand memorials or ornate tombs, but through the simple deed of living, of valuing the gifts they bestowed upon us, of working to create a better world for those who follow. For ultimately, that is the only tribute that truly matters, the one that persists in the hearts and thoughts of future generations, the one that reverberates through time like a rallying cry, a reminder that even in the most challenging of moments, there exists a glimmer of hope, that even amid insurmountable adversity, the human spirit prevails. And so, as we drift off to rest in our comfortable beds and climate-controlled spaces, let us take a moment to remember the blacksmith and his kin, for the countless nameless and faceless peasants who labored, suffered, and perished, all so that we could live. Let us honor their memory, and in doing so, remember who we are. For we are all interconnected in the grand tapestry of history, crafted from the threads of time and experience. While our individual contributions might appear minor, collectively, they create a design of remarkable intricacy and beauty. This design reaches back to the earliest moments of civilization and extends forward to the very brink of the future. So rest well, dear listener. Sleep and envision a reality where the struggles of the peasants are nothing but a distant echo, a realm where everyone, irrespective of their origins or status, can live with dignity and aspiration. It might seem to be an unattainable wish, a dreamer's quest in a world still plagued by inequality and injustice. Yet, as the blacksmith recognized, even the seemingly most unattainable dreams can become a reality if we find the courage to believe, to fight, to strive, and to persevere against all challenges. That is the essence of the Middle Ages, the truth of human history itself, and it's a message we should hold dear. So rest peacefully, my friend, rest and dream with ambition. Ultimately, we all share the same aspirations, for life, for love, for a brighter tomorrow. Though the path ahead may be arduous and lengthy, we traverse it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, step by step toward the optimistic promise of the future, a future founded on the resilience and sacrifices of those who came before us, those countless individuals who battled to turn the vision of a better world into reality. And even in the darkest, most trying times, they held on to their faith in themselves, faith in each other, faith in the power of the human spirit to surmount every obstacle. This faith has carried us through countless generations, a faith that shines as brightly today as it did back then. So let's nurture that faith while we remember those who paved the way. Let's pay tribute to their legacy by living lives, filled with purpose and intention, working relentlessly to improve the world just a little bit more than we found it. This is a small yet significant way to honor the forgotten heroes of our past. And as we drift into slumber, nestled in warmth and comfort, let us take a moment to express silent gratitude, thankful for the blessings we possess, grateful for the sacrifices made by those before us, thankful for the promise of a brighter future. For we are the realization of our ancestors' dreams, the culmination of their hardships and victories. Even though they may have faded from the annals of history, they resonate within us, woven into the very essence of our existence. So rest peacefully, dear listener. Sleep and dream, and don't forget that in the end, that's all any of us can truly do, to remember, to envision, and to continue the timeless struggle for a better world. A world where the struggles of the peasants are mere echoes of the past, and where the light of hope glimmers brightly for everyone to behold. The relentless cycles of poverty, illness, and oppression persisted year after year for the ordinary people of medieval Europe. Yet amid their unending toil and adversity, there were still shimmers of happiness and celebration that enlivened their harsh realities. A wedding was undeniably a joyous event in the village. The young couple, despite the uncertainty of their future, radiated hopeful smiles as they stood before the priest. Their families had scrimped and saved to prepare a modest feast, featuring some pork, a small amount of precious white bread, and even a flagon of weak wine. The fiddler played an upbeat melody, and the villagers danced and laughed momentarily, casting aside their worries during a few hours of merriment. The arrival of a newborn was yet another occasion for joy, albeit shadowed by life's grim realities. Many infants often did not survive their first year, falling victim to disease, malnutrition, or the elements. But for the time being, the new parents marveled at their delicate creation, counting tiny fingers and toes and hoping for a strong, healthy child. Grandmothers and aunts bustled around, sharing their advice on swaddling and nursing. The fragile and precious new life ignited a spark of hope within the family. The changing seasons also served as a marker of time and brought about occasional festivities. Harvest season, when the crops yielded bountifully, was a time of joy and gratitude. The intense labor of gathering the fields from dawn until dusk was ultimately rewarded with overflowing baskets of grain. The lord of the manor would take his share, yet there remained plenty to satisfy hunger and store away for the harsh winter months looming ahead. Villagers came together to celebrate with a harvest feast, reveling in the fruits of their hard work in a spirit of community. Tables made of rough-hewn wood were laden with platters of roasted meats, hearty pottages brimming with vegetables, and warm fresh bread. Ale poured freely, as the master vintner received additional supplies to brew a special batch for this joyous event. The night was filled with music and jubilant laughter, as the townsfolk enjoyed themselves, momentarily shedding the burdens of their lives for an evening of merriment. Festivals, whether religious or secular, also offered a much-needed respite from the monotony of everyday existence. Christmas was marked by feasting and singing, while Easter heralded the arrival of spring, and May Day celebrated the return of warmth with dances around the maypole. Although the nobility indulged in these occasions with extravagant feasts and spectacles, the common people maintained their own modest customs. During Christmas, serf families would gather in their humble one-room homes, huddled around the hearth for warmth. The Yule log crackled merrily, casting a warm glow on their faces as they exchanged small handmade gifts, a doll fashioned from corn husks or a newly sewn woolen cloak from their mother. They sang traditional carols and shared tales of Christmases past, taking comfort in the familiar traditions. They sang traditional carols and shared tales of Christmases past, taking comfort in the familiar traditions. On May Day morning, village maidens rose at dawn to partake in dew baths, believing it would bring them health and beauty for the coming year. They collected wildflowers to create garlands for their hair and danced around the maypole, the vibrant ribbons fluttering in the breeze. The young men would glance admiringly at the beautiful girls, while fresh courtships began to bloom alongside the budding spring flowers. Yet, despite the joy these festivities brought, they were fleeting moments, amid lives characterized by relentless hardship. For most peasants, each day unfolded similarly, awakening with the dawn to work the fields, laboring under the vigilant eye of the manor lord's steward, and collapsing into bed, exhausted, as the last light disappeared from the horizon. It was a harsh and uncertain existence, offering little in the way of hope or prospects for a better life. Still, there were whispers of discontent, tiny flames of rebellion igniting among the oppressed. In 1358, French peasants erupted in the Jacquard uprising against heavy taxation and unbearable conditions, torching noble estates and demanding reform. Although the uprising was brutally quelled, it sowed the seeds of resistance. In England, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 saw tens of thousands of commoners, spearheaded by the charismatic Wat Tyler, march towards London to protest the burdensome taxes and lack of rights. They besieged the Tower of London, plundered the Archbishop's residence, and presented their grievances to the young King Richard II, who was only 14. Tyler met his end in a clash with the Lord Mayor, while the youthful king attempted to disperse the rebels with insincere assurances. Yet the uprising reverberated across the nation, shattering the illusion of noble dominance. Slowly and steadily, the ancient feudal structure began to weaken. The Black Death had significantly reduced the population, making labor more sought after. Peasants could now demand greater wages and expanded rights. The establishment of towns and flourishing trade gave rise to a burgeoning middle class of artisans and merchants who resented the rigid social order. The printing press started disseminating new ideas and knowledge to the public. However, these transformations took time, unfolding over generations. The blacksmith, who had suffered the loss of his family to the plague, would not live to see his children rise beyond their circumstances. The son of a farmer, returning from the grim realities of war, remained unaware that his descendants would eventually claim their own piece of land. The affluent lord and lady, ensconced within their fortified keep, could not foresee a future where their privileges would vanish. For the moment, life continued as it always had. The sun rose and set, the seasons cycled through, and the peasants labored and persevered. They discovered joy in small things, like a fresh loaf of bread, a healthy child, or a village dance. Their faith provided meaning amidst suffering and offered hope for a better existence in the afterlife. They embraced hope, that delicate, unquenchable flame that no amount of hardship could extinguish. As you settle down for the night, nestled in your modern bed, take a moment to consider the struggles and simple pleasures of those who came before us. Their strength, resilience, and indomitable spirit in the face of unimaginable challenges. The gradual progression of society, earned through strife, remains incomplete. The shared human journey that connects us through the ages, the love, loss, struggle, and victories that shape our existence. Allow their narratives to weave into your dreams, a reminder of the vast distance we've traveled and the journey that still lies ahead. Rest now and enjoy a peaceful slumber, knowing you are part of a continuing human saga, rich in complexity and significance. Good night. The blacksmith's heartache was only a small facet of the larger tragedy unfolding across the continent. As the plague intensified its horrific grip, fear and desperation seized the hearts of both the wealthy and the impoverished. The manor lord confined himself and his family within their stone fortress, leaving the serfs to fend for themselves. He commanded his armed men to shoot any peasant who dared approach the gates seeking help. The once vibrant manor courtyards fell eerily silent, punctuated only by the mournful cries of the dying and the creaking of carts meant for the deceased. The plague showed no mercy to anyone. From the humblest peasant to the lord's very own daughter, a refined young lady of 16, who fell victim to the fever within mere days. As the Black Death swept through, the fields became wild and overrun with weeds. With countless serfs struck down, no one remained to cultivate the land or gather the harvest. The lord observed helplessly from his stronghold as his affluence and power disintegrated alongside the corpses of his workers. What value did his title and estate hold now, with no laborers to tend the earth or pay rents and tithes? The plague left his assets depleted and his food stores empty. Yet even the lord's suffering paled in comparison to that of the everyday people. For those fortunate enough to evade the disease's grasp, a more gradual decline awaited them as famine began to creep across the land. With the fields untended and grain reserves dwindling, the spectre of hunger replaced illness as the peasants' principal tormentor. Their bellies distended and skins stretched tight over bones. They scavenged the desolate terrain for any morsel of food. Leather shoes were boiled down into a vile concoction, while grass and bark were combined with precious bits of flour to create unpleasant bread. Tragically, these desperate efforts merely postponed the inevitable for many. A mercifully swift death from the plague was now supplanted by the slow, torturous misery of starvation. Numerous individuals took their own lives rather than endure the persistent pain in their bellies and the sight of their children's hollow, lifeless gazes. Yet, amidst these bleak circumstances, there were some who held on to hope, however. Slim. Throughout this disaster, the local parish priest remained unwavering in his dedication, risking infection to provide last rites and solace to the dying. When the plague claimed the blacksmith's dear wife and children, it was the priest who excavated their graves and offered the prayers that would guide them to eternal rest. And when the blacksmith sank to his knees in despair, railing against the harshness of a God who would allow such suffering, it was the priest who consoled him gently. With a hand resting on the trembling shoulder of the blacksmith, the priest spoke of the divine mysteries and the assurance of reuniting with loved ones in the afterlife. It was little comfort to the shattered heart of the blacksmith. However, over time, the priest's kindness and unwavering dedication would indeed ignite something within him. Not joy, but perhaps a glimmer of faith and the resilience he needed to persist despite all the pain and loss. Each day the blacksmith stepped from his forge to assist the priest in caring for the sick and burying the deceased. Together, The two men battled to keep the flame of hope alive, even as the plague wrought havoc. Months flowed into years, and gradually the grip of the Black Death began to ease. The number of the ill dwindled. The death carts ceased their journey through the village. Slowly and cautiously, normal life resumed its patterns. For the blacksmith and other survivors, the world had changed forever, with the wounds of loss still fresh and exposed. Yet they had withstood the unimaginable now, facing the future with the hard-earned wisdom of those who have confronted death itself. Just as people began to glimpse a semblance of normalcy returning, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. News spread regarding escalating tensions between the English and French monarchies. The peace that had prevailed for generations was shattered, as age-old rivalries, feudal duties and dynastic disputes erupted into open conflict. The 100 Years' War had commenced. For the weary peasants, the outbreak of strife between the crown and nobility felt remote, far removed from their immediate struggle for survival. After all, how significant was it, who among the nobility occupied a gilded throne when your daily efforts revolved around coaxing stubborn oats from rocky soil? Yet the war would not remain on the periphery for long. Before long, the feudal levy would summon them, compelling every able-bodied man to fight and sacrifice for the ambitions of their lords. On a brisk autumn morning, the blacksmith was hard at work in his forge, shaping a new plowshare for the local farmer. His roughened hands held the tongs tightly as he submerged the glowing iron into the water barrel, producing a hissing plume of steam. Completely absorbed in his work, he nearly overlooked the unrest happening outside, the clinking of harnesses, the snorting of war horses, and the whispers of a crowd that was starting to gather. Setting his tools aside, he stepped out of the dimly lit forge, squinting against the sudden bright light. There, on the outskirts of town, a sight that filled him with dread. A procession of armored knights on horseback, their circlets emblazoned, with the crest of the manor lord. Following them was a group of foot soldiers equipped with pikes and crossbows. Their mission was clear: to collect the village's young men and march them off to battle for lord and land. The blacksmith scanned the pale faces of the assembled peasants, finally locking eyes with a tall, lanky boy at the front. His apprentice, the young lad who had come to him 5 years ago, orphaned and starving, whom he had nourished, clothed, and taught the intricacies of metalwork. A sharpened ache shot through him as he recalled his own son, lost to the plague long ago, and how he had envisioned passing down the forge to his own blood. Instead, in this apprentice, he found a kind of surrogate son, a means to keep his craft alive, a path to draw meaning and purpose from the heartbreak of his past. Now war threatened to take that boy away as well, marking yet another loss in a life that had already endured too much. The blacksmith caught a glimpse of his apprentice's terrified gaze, reflecting the boy's desperate wish to flee, to evade the knight's steely command. Yet they both knew that resistance or escape was pointless. With a heavy heart, the blacksmith stepped forward and pulled the trembling youth into a brief, fervent embrace. "Be brave," he whispered earnestly, as he let the boy go to join the eye, other conscripts gathering before their lords. "Remember your training. Keep your wits about you." He pressed a small amulet of the Blessed Virgin into the boy's hand, a final charm against the unimaginable dangers that lay ahead. The young man nodded silently, wrapping his fingers around the amulet as he squared his narrow shoulders and moved to join the ranks of the doomed youth. The blacksmith stood powerless, his fists clenched, as he watched the knights lead their charges away, guiding them down the muddy path that would take them to whatever far-off battlefield awaited. As the sound of hooves clattering and the rustling of feet diminished, the smith turned back to his forge, feeling suddenly cold despite the still-burning coals in the hearth. In the hollow silence that followed, the vast emptiness of the years to come seemed to stretch before him. No children to bring up, no legacy to cultivate, no one to share the toil as he fought against age and arthritis at the anvil. For a moment, a wave of sorrow and despair rose to choke him, but then taking a deep, shuddering breath, he shook off the hopelessness that threatened to overwhelm him. He was well acquainted with hardship and loss. They all were, not after the plague and the lean times that ensued. Surrender was a luxury he could not afford. There was work to be done, always more work. He was needed, perhaps now more than ever. With renewed determination, the blacksmith intensified the flames into a fierce blaze and picked up his hammer once more. If he could not fight for king and country, he would contribute in his own way by forging the tools and implements that would assist his neighbors in coaxing life from the yielding earth. That would help rebuild some semblance of the world they had lost. One horseshoe, one hoe, one harrow at a time, he would do his part to mend this fractured land. It may be a small role, but it was nonetheless a vital one. As the conflict dragged on year after devastating year, the blacksmith rarely allowed himself to think about his apprentice and the horrors the young boy must be experiencing on some far-off battleground. Updates from the front line were infrequent and rarely uplifting, with news of crushing English victories, the humiliating surrender of the French king, and the terror of roaming mercenaries that pillaged the land after the army had passed. All he could do was hope that the boy's skills, sharpened under his rigorous guidance, would be sufficient to keep him safe, enabling him to repair the weapons and armor of his fellow soldiers and to shoe the steeds and coursers of his masters. And on the rare instances when he let himself envision the boy's return, he saw the apprentice at the anvil, no longer a mere youth, but a man shaped by the trials of war, prepared to claim his rightful position as the master of the forge. Yet such musings were a perilous indulgence, a distraction from the relentless grind of the present. Thus the blacksmith dedicated himself to his work, the hammer clanging from sunrise to sunset as he fashioned the essential tools of survival. The seasons cycled, peace waxed and waned, and still the smith persevered, his once robust back now stooped from years spent hunched over the anvil, his rugged hands marked by burns and scars. The seasons cycled, peace waxed and waned, and still the smith persevered, his once robust back now stooped from years spent hunched over the anvil, his rugged hands marked by burns and scars. Then one evening, just as he banked the coals and readied to close the forge for the night, a shadow loomed at the doorway. The smith turned, his heart leaping in his chest as he recognized the figure outlined there, taller and broader than he recalled, dressed in a soiled gambeson and tarnished mail, but undeniably familiar. It was the apprentice, or rather, the young man he had transformed into, standing at the threshold, his eyes weary and searching in the dwindling light of the forge. For a prolonged moment, they gazed at each other, tears shimmering in the smith's swollen eyes, a hesitant smile playing at the lips of the soldier. Then, in an impulsive burst, the young man crossed the earthen floor with 2 powerful strides and fell into his master's embrace. The years, distances, and countless sorrows evaporated in the reassuring safety of the old man's arms. There would be ample time later for storytelling, for reflecting on all that had transpired. The smith recognized that the scars his apprentice bore ran deeper than the surface. The path ahead would be anything but straightforward. Yet, for the moment, it sufficed to acknowledge that he had returned, that amid the turmoil of war and the world's harsh realities, this single thread of hope had remained intact. That night, as the forge's flames dwindled to glowing embers, and the 2 men shared a modest meal of coarse bread and bitter ale, the blacksmith found himself marveling at the quiet strength of the human spirit. They had endured so much in this unforgiving land and challenging era, the ravages of plague, the deprivations of famine, the brutality of war and oppression. Yet, through some incomprehensible mixture of hope and resilience, life continued. In the presence of the apprentice, he had thought he lost forever. Within the shelter of the forge, which had anchored him through numerous storms, the smith felt a flicker of something suspiciously resembling optimism awaken within him. The world was transforming slowly yet undeniably. The old certainties of crown and manor were yielding to something new, something that offered a glimmer of hope to even the humblest serf. Perhaps, just perhaps, the sacrifices and trials of previous generations could become the foundation for a brighter future. It was a delicate hope, certainly, but like the apprentice resting now by the hearth, it was one he would cherish and protect, fully aware of how easily such flames could be extinguished. As the blacksmith tended to the coals for the final time, and moved to his pallet, he silently expressed his gratitude for the roof over him, the food he had, and the safe return of his apprentice from the war's chaos. In a realm rife with uncertainty, where pain and loss prevailed as inevitable truths, these small blessings were cherished beyond measure. For this night at least, he would cling to them tightly, serving as a bulwark against the trials that undoubtedly lay ahead. Life would endure, as it always had and always would, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who labored and persevered, who loved, mourned, and dared to dream amidst the harsh realities of this cruel yet beautiful world. Ultimately, that may have been enough, to have lived, to have survived, to contribute in some modest way to the grand narrative of human resilience. Let the nobles bask in their castles and accolades, for the likes of the blacksmith and his apprentice had discovered their own form of victory in the simplest acts of endurance. By nurturing the land and repairing what was damaged, by sharing their wisdom with the next generation, they would establish a legacy uniquely theirs, fashioned, not in the heat of conflict, but in the quiet, steadfast efforts of a life well lived. So as the blacksmith drifted into a dreamless slumber, he did so with a tranquil heart, reassured that regardless of what awaited him, he and his kin would persist, as constant and unwavering as the changing of the seasons, as timeless as the iron from which they shaped their purpose and hope. The journey ahead would indeed be arduous, as it always had been, yet they would face it with the same resolute strength that had seen them through to this point, and in the end, that would suffice. As the sun began its gradual descent, casting a golden hue over the manor's fields, the exhausted serfs exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Another day of grueling labor was drawing to a close, and in the end that would suffice. Another day of grueling labor was drawing to a close. They collect their basic implements, scythes, hoes, and rakes, and start the lengthy trek back to their modest homes. Among them is a young boy, just barely into his teenage years, his hands already rough and calloused from years of labor in the fields. He dreams of a life that's different, a life that transcends the limitations of the manor. He's heard tales of the expanding towns and the prospects for those skilled in a trade. Yet, for now, he remains tethered to this land, bound by the unseen shackles of the feudal system. As he makes his way home, he passes by the blacksmith's workshop, the heat radiating from the furnace hitting him like a wave. He halts momentarily, captivated by the blacksmith's craft. The man's muscles flex as he pounds the glowing metal, molding it into tools and weapons. The boy feels a surge of envy, longing for a skill, a trade that could provide him an escape from this life of servitude. Yet such aspirations feel hopeless. He was born a serf, and a serf he shall remain. His life is not his to own, it belongs to the lord of the manor. With a sigh, the boy resumes his journey. Once home, he finds his family already gathered around a meager meal, a thin porridge made from barley and vegetables. His younger siblings wail, their stomachs aching from hunger. His mother struggles to soothe them, but there is little relief to offer. The harvest was dismal this year, and the Lord has taken his portion, leaving them with barely enough to survive. Exhausted, the boy sinks down and begins to eat. The porridge is bland, nearly flavorless, yet it is all they possess. He thinks of the sumptuous feasts enjoyed by the Lord and his family in the manor house. He's heard enchanting tales of roast meats, exotic spices, and rich desserts. His mouth waters at the thought, yet he quickly dismisses it. Such luxuries are not meant for someone like him. As the family eats in silence, an unexpected disturbance from outside captures their attention. Shouts and screams reverberate throughout the village. The boy's father leaps up and hurries to the door. The boy trails closely behind, his heart racing. Outside, the village is in utter turmoil. People flee, their faces drawn with fear. Then he spots it, a cart overflowing with corpses. The plague doctor walks beside it. His beaked mask and dark attire a horrifying sight. The boy feels a chill run through him. The Black Death has arrived in their village. Terror constricts the boy's heart as he glances at his father, seeking solace, a glimmer of hope amidst this nightmare. But his father's expression is somber, his eyes brimming with a deep, resigned despair. They both realize that escape is not an option. The plague has come and it will exact a heavy toll. In the following days, the village spirals into chaos. The sick and dying are everywhere, their bodies festering with black buboes. The odor of death permeates the air. The boy watches, powerless, as his friends and neighbors fall victim to the illness. He prays fervently, pleading with God to protect his family, yet his prayers remain unanswered. First, his younger sister falls prey, her small frame racked with fever and agony. Next is his mother, who in her final days cares for the sick only to contract the plague herself. Finally, his father, once a pillar of strength and resilience, deteriorates before his eyes. Now the boy is left alone, a sole survivor in a village filled with specters. The fields lie barren, the livestock dead or dying. The Lord is absent, having retreated to his country estate to escape the plague. A sense of bitter anger wells up within the boy. They have been left to perish, forsaken by those meant to protect them. Yet, amidst his sorrow and despair, the boy understands he must press on. He must honor the memory of his family and all those who have been lost. He will rebuild. He will endure. It's all he can do. As the weeks pass, the plague's grip on the village begins to ease. The death carts arrive less frequently, and the wails of mourners start to fade. The boy steps outside, blinking at the sunlight. The world appears altered now, more unforgiving, more brutal, yet he has changed as well. Shaped by sorrow and hardship, he has become both tougher and more tenacious. He gazes across the desolate fields and deserted homes, understanding it will be years before they can rebuild from this ruin. But he also recognizes that life persists. The seasons will shift, crops will sprout anew, and he will be there to cultivate the land just as his father and grandfather did before him. The boy embarks on his tasks, his steps heavy yet resolute. He is a serf tied to this earth, yet he embodies a survivor's spirit. This grants him a certain freedom, the freedom to endure, to persevere amid unimaginable adversity. It's a modest triumph, but in this unforgiving world it is sufficient. While he toils, his thoughts drift towards the future. He is aware that life will remain challenging. There will be further hardships, additional losses. The feudal system that confines him is unlikely to undergo change anytime soon. Yet he cannot shake off a flicker of hope. He recalls tales he's heard of peasant uprisings in other regions, of serfs who have rebelled against their lords, demanding improved treatment and more rights. He understands that such thoughts are perilous, potentially incurring grave punishment or even death. Nevertheless, that notion ignites a spark within him. Perhaps, just perhaps, change is on the horizon. Maybe someday serfs like him will possess their own land, reaping the benefits of their labor. Perhaps education will not be a privilege reserved for the wealthy and the clergy, but accessible to everyone. Perhaps the rigid social structure that keeps him downtrodden will eventually fall apart. The boy shakes his head, pushing these ideas away as fanciful hopes. He must concentrate on the present, on surviving day by day. Yet the aspirations linger, a faint flicker of optimism in a bleak world. As dusk approaches, he pauses from his work, inhaling deeply, drawing in the cool evening air. Despite all that has transpired, beauty still exists in this world. The hues of the setting sun, the gentle breeze rustling through the leaves, the distant sounds of children laughing as they play. He reflects on his family, cherishing the love they shared, even amidst the challenges they endured. He recalls the joyful moments that punctuated their tough lives, the celebrations during harvest, the weddings and the births, the tranquil moments of happiness spent around the fire. These are the fragments of life that make it worthwhile, even in the most trying times. These memories provide him with the strength to persevere. The boy faces the darkening sky, offering an unspoken prayer, a prayer for the souls of the lost, for endurance, for a brighter future, no matter how far away it may seem. He then gathers his tools and begins the long trek home. Tomorrow will present fresh obstacles and new struggles, but for now he seeks rest. And perhaps, in his dreams, he will catch a glimpse of that brighter world, the spark of hope that propels him through each arduous day. As the boy's silhouette fades into the twilight, we are reminded of the unwavering strength of the human spirit. Throughout history, people have confronted unimaginable challenges, war, disease, oppression, poverty, yet they have prevailed. They discovered methods to adapt, survive, and even flourish. This young serf's tale represents the experiences of countless individuals throughout the Middle Ages and beyond. It stands as a testament to the resilience and courage inherent in the human experience. In our modern era, we encounter our own set of challenges. However, we can draw motivation from those who came before us, from their tenacity in the face of adversity, and their capacity to uncover hope amid the bleakest circumstances. As we navigate our daily lives filled with modern conveniences and comforts, it's all too easy to overlook the struggles faced by those who preceded us. Yet, their narratives weave into the fabric of our shared history, serving as a reminder of our origins and our ability to triumph over adversity. So let us commemorate their legacy, not solely that of the serfs and peasant folk in medieval Europe, but of all individuals throughout the ages who have faced trials and tribulations. Let us draw inspiration from their fortitude and perseverance, and let us endeavor to forge a world where suffering is diminished, where opportunity and liberty are accessible to everyone. As we settle in for the night, let us think of the young serf laboring in the fields of a manor ages ago. May his tale encourage us to appreciate what we possess and to remain steadfast in our pursuit of a more equitable and improved world. Ultimately, that is the heritage we can all hope to leave behind, a world that is slightly better than the one we inherited, a world where the aspirations of that young serf and the dreams of all who followed can finally come to fruition. So now, dear listener, rest easy, allow the worries and stress of your day to dissolve, and may you find that brighter world we collectively seek in your dreams, that beacon of hope that guides us through even the darkest moments. Thus, as the sun dips below the horizon on yet another day in this medieval village, the blacksmith permits himself a fleeting moment of respite. He sinks onto a weathered wooden bench outside his forge, his rugged hands clasped, his head bowed in weariness and sorrow. The weight of losing his wife and children to the plague hangs heavily in his heart, a burden he will bear for all his remaining days. The village begins to drift into its customary night cycle. The animals are gathered in from the fields, their lowing and bleating resonating in the cool night air. Smoke billows from the thatched rooftops as women prepare the evening meal over open flames. Children race through the muddy paths, their laughter a brief spark of joy in an otherwise grim existence. The blacksmith lifts his gaze to the darkening heavens, observing the emergence of the first stars. He reflects on his life, contemplating the twists of fate that have led him to this point. Born a serf, he considered himself fortunate to be taken on as an apprentice by the village blacksmith, learning a trade that offered him a sliver of freedom and recognition. Yet even this opportunity came with sacrifices, endless hours of grueling labor, burns and scars from the forge, and the relentless fight to make ends meet. Now the plague has stripped away even that meager solace. In just a few days, he has lost his family, his very reason for existence. He is left to ponder how he will muster the strength to confront the uncertain future that lies ahead. As if in response to his silent plea, the village priest arrives at his side. The elderly man places a comforting hand on the blacksmith's shoulder, his weathered face full of empathy. "Have faith, my son," he whispers gently. "The Lord tests us, but he also imparts the strength to persevere." The blacksmith nods, inhaling a shaky breath. He acknowledges the truth in the priest's words. He has managed to endure thus far through sheer determination, by putting one foot in front of the other despite feeling utterly lost. He will honor the memory of his loved ones by continuing to live, work, and hold on to hope for a brighter future. After giving the blacksmith one last, reassuring pat, the priest moves on to provide comfort and prayers to the other villagers. The blacksmith watches him depart, feeling a flicker of warmth ignite within him. He realizes he is not alone. They are all united in this struggle. The farmers, the craftsmen, the serfs, and the freemen, all striving to carve out a life in a harsh and relentless world. He rises from his spot, his body heavy with fatigue. Tomorrow will bring new trials and heartaches. Yet for now, he finds solace in the little things. A warm fire, a full stomach, and the camaraderie of his fellow villagers. It may not be much, but it is sufficient, it must be. As he walks towards his solitary cottage on the village's outskirts, the camera pulls back, capturing the scene one last time. The dancing flames from the torches cast light on the weary figures heading homeward, embodying a community united through struggle and perseverance. This is a vision that has unfolded countless times across the ages, a tribute to the resilient human spirit. As we bid farewell to this medieval era, our hearts are weighed down by the awareness of the hardships that shaped daily existence for many. Nevertheless, we depart with a profound admiration for those who faced formidable challenges, recognizing their bravery and resolve against overwhelming adversities. As you begin to drift into slumber, allow your thoughts to wander to the blacksmith and his village. Picture the quiet fortitude that empowered them through the darkest chapters of their lives, the glimmers of hope and humanity that penetrated even the most dismal environments. And remember, their legacy persists within us, reflected in the resilience and empathy we nurture in our hearts. Thank you for embarking on this exploration of medieval history with me. I hope it has fostered a fresh appreciation for the comforts and freedoms we often take for granted, and deepened your understanding of the shared human experience that connects us all. If you found this video enjoyable, please consider subscribing to our channel for more calming and enlightening content designed to assist you in relaxing and easing into sleep. Until next time, may your dreams be enriched with the quiet fortitude and undying spirit of those who came before. Good night.